Kia ora koutou, nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to our fourth session of annual budget submissions. I'm Councillor Karen Naylor. We have most councillors here, but we also have online Councillor Bowen, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Finlay, and the Deputy Mayor. The meeting is being recorded and is available on the Council's website, and it will also be live streamed. Just to remind you of the health and safety issues, if in case of an emergency, the gathering point is the clock tower on Te Marae or Hene, and we would just need to follow the instructions of the administrators. And if needed, the defibrillator is downstairs in the link span. All councillors online, if you're able to keep your cameras on, that would be lovely. At the moment, the sound is not working for the participants online, so if councillors do have a question, that will need to be managed through the chat. For other councillors here, just if you'd like to ask a question, use your device. Just to remind submitters that you will have 10 minutes. There's a traffic light system here. You'll get a reminder after 7 minutes when the traffic light goes to orange, and then again at 9 minutes when it goes to red. And we'd encourage you to allow some time for questions as well. We don't have our first submitter here yet. We've got two submitters that are attending online today. So we'll move to the second submitter. So it won't be a moment. Procedures. Okay. Before we move to that, we just need to move a resolution to note the procedure sheet. If someone could second that. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. All those in favour, raise your hand. And that's carried. Thank you. So we will move to the second submission on our sheet, which is submission number 129, Mr. Passman. Welcome. And if you can just make your way down to the desk here, thank you.
Good morning. And thank you for giving me this.
If you could just pop the microphone on, please.
Do I have to keep pressing this when I speak?
Councillor Barrett will help.
Just leave it on. Now you can hear me, can you?
Thank you.
Oh, very good. Well, I'll just repeat myself. Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak to you. There's just a bit of a technicality. I've set up some of the things I want to talk about on the slide system, but I failed to include one particular item, and I've provided you with print copies of that item, so that will be relevant when I get to that bit of my ramble. My concerns about the plan and how it's to be activated, I don't know where that's coming from, but if you can get rid of it, that would be helpful. You're about halfway through. Can you go to the start, please? Sorry?
That's the first slide you've given me.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's the first slide. Thank you. The concerns I have are not so much for this rate increase. Inflation, all the rest of the rigmarole and drama is hitting us all. You came out with a figure in this wee publication of 8.3%, which on the face of it didn't seem to me to be unreasonable. I was expecting more, and those who've managed to engineer the budget down to a rise of 8.3%, I think have done pretty well under the circumstances. That doesn't mean to say there isn't room for shaving a bit off here or a bit off there, which I would urge council to do. But I have no overriding concerns about the budget and what you're faced with. My concern is the way you appear to be going about raising the money. In other words, what we as ratepayers are going to have to confront. The 8.3% mentioned in here, I thought, well, yes, okay, let's have a look and see how that impacts on our own house. So I went onto the website and had a look, and I was a bit astounded when I discovered from the arithmetic that our rates were set to go up, not 8.3%, not even a small margin above it, but by 20%, which seemed a bit irrational. Why? Well, I wonder if, because we live in Hawker-Fitu, we were regarded as rich buggers, and you could afford to clout us. So I thought about another area in town, Tarkaro. I don't know very much about Tarkaro, but I know it's not Hawker-Fitu. So I got a map and stuck my finger on it, and that's the property that my finger landed on. That's in Birmingham Street. Very pleasant looking place, modest looking house, bit of garden in the front, bit of garden in the back. Fine. So what are they going to be faced with under your proposed new rates? Can you have the next slide, please? Is anybody alive?
We'll get someone onto that.
Thank you very much. There's the figure. These poor souls currently pay 2,759, and according to your proposals, they're set to pay 9,907. That really didn't give me very much help, because I couldn't understand how on earth anybody could come up with figures like that. So looking elsewhere around town didn't seem to be giving me much of an indication as to why my rates had gone up 20%. Or I suppose I could say, thank God they hadn't gone up by that amount. So then I thought, this is weird. I haven't got time to go searching around the whole of Tarkaro or Palmerston North in general, so I thought I'd focus on our street, Seaton Court. And I discovered on looking at everybody's situation in Seaton Court that we appeared to have been divided into two classes of ratepayers. Can I have the next slide, please? There are those of us who've seen a land value rise of around 100%, and we're being whacked with a 20% proposed increase. There are 8 other dwellers in Seaton Court whose properties have gone up substantially. 62% is no mean increase. But lo and behold, these good folk have got a discount, minus 2%. That's the average. The best offer, I guess you could call it, for these residents is a reduction of 6%, which relates to 1 or 2 of the properties. All of it odd. Next slide, please. So this kind of posed a question or two. All ratepayers are facing council's need for extra revenue. All ratepayers have increased land values substantially. Why are all ratepayers not being asked to share the burden? Why are Seaton Court residents being divided into 2 groups? Those who are gifted a rates reduction and those who have been hammered by huge rates rises. The thought occurred to me, and indeed it was mentioned in this little booklet, that maybe subdivision has something to do with it. So I thought, well, I'll have a look at this subdivision thing and see if that explains things. Number 1 Seaton Court in our street is facing a rates rise of 19%. Next slide, please. That's it. So if subdivision is the rationale for hitting us hard with these 20% or thereabouts rate increases, how does that work out for number 1 Seaton Court? Well, you can see it there. It's an acute triangular shape, which I believe would preclude another house being erected there. And even if you were delighted with the idea of a triangular house, good luck with getting furniture to fit in it, because I don't know anybody who makes triangular beds. There's no access past the house. As you can see on either side, you'd be lucky to get a pushchair down there. The Outstay stream runs through the bottom of the property, and the whole of the back garden is part of your flood protection scheme. So you add all that up and ask yourselves, is that subdividable? Well, maybe not. I then went on to look at a property just round the corner, thinking, well, maybe Seaton Court's being picked out for special punishment. Let's see what's happening to near neighbours. Next slide, please. This place is just round the corner on Marne Street. Modest-sized house, bit of garden at the front, bit of garden at the back. Reminds me of the comments I made about the house in Birmingham Street. This place has got a proposed rates rise of 3%. On the basis of using subdivision as logic, you'd think, well, that's all right, 3% isn't even the rate of inflation. But, can I have the next slide, please? A developer, and developers being smart people, jacked up the old house, shifted it across to the boundary, and in the remaining space are putting up 2 houses. So what does that say about the principle of subdivision when applied to this property and others? Because according to the rules you might be applying, this property shouldn't have been subdividable. And now if I can refer you to that sheet I sent round. Looking a little further out from Seaton Court into Hawkerfitu, I wondered what was happening to some of our bigger properties. This is one of them. Aerial view shows what I would understand to be a very nice house with a huge area of ground. Its land area is over half an acre. Its land value increased $675,000. Rates increase 3%. $314, which is half the amount you're proposing to charge number 1 Seaton Court, whose property I would claim isn't subdividable. Last slide, please. So, does this idea of subdivision explain what's going on? Not to me. And if subdivision hasn't been used as a means of developing these strange numbers, what has? Are you looking at some form of capital gains taxation, or are you adopting a garden tax? I don't know what you're doing. All I can say is that in my view, rates should be set on a fair distribution basis, and all ratepayers should make at least a contribution to the increased amount of money you're looking for. What else makes sense? Now, I notice my light's up. I just want to offer one last thought. I've laboured you with these concerns I have for what appears to be eventuating. So what do you do about it? It's all right, well, complaining, but try to offer a solution. And I know you're going through the process of trying to develop a better system for rates, for charging rates. In the meantime, and as an interim measure, my view is that you should establish a flat rate for the extra revenue needed. I repeat that, a flat rate for the extra revenue needed. Then you apply this flat rate to each property's increased land value, and then the extra you add on to the rates of the previous year. My view is everybody in Palmerston North expects their rates to go up. My belief is that pretty much everybody in Palmerston North would expect that process to be fair, reasonable, and understandable. The system you're proposing is none of those things. What I suggest might be a way forward. I'm not suggesting it should be the ultimate solution. I'm simply suggesting that it could be an interim measure to get you through the period while you're reviewing what might be done, how things might be improved, and whether the kind of suggestion I've made could form any basis for what you want to do on a more permanent basis going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you happy to take some questions?
I'll wait till the questions come, then I'll know.
Has any councillors got a question? Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Passman. That's a very good summary of some of the issues I think that council is facing. But my question just relates to Birmingham Street. Is that classed as a double residential property, or is it?
I have no idea how it's classed. It simply looks to me, from what I can see from the map, and from what I can see from going on Google, looking at the street view, that it's a fairly ordinary, pleasant house with, unless you're proposing to put up multi-storey flats on that section, I can't see how you can come up with a figure of 9,000.
Right, and I think Councillor Dennison, he's actually looked it up as well, and he says that it's a single residential. Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Dennison.
Yes, thank you for the background work that you've brought forward. I think it reveals even the exaggeration of the increase and the impact of the revaluation. As far as your proposal around the flat rate, can I just understand, so what you're suggesting is that we could potentially use the rating allocation from the previous year, but just allocate the rate increase across all properties as a flat rate?
As a flat rate on the basis of land value. Our land value is higher than some of our neighbours in the street. I would pay more based on a flat rate applied to my additional value over the 12 months. That's all right. They would pay something which would be, I don't know, a third of what I would have to pay. I would argue they might not like having to pay anything extra, but they would not fundamentally disagree with that approach.
Yes. So what that would entail is, if I understand it correctly, everyone would get an increase off their new valuation, yes, only on the increase 8.3.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
We do have one question from Councillor Johnson online. It's just disappeared. Councillor Johnson, can you just check if you can actually, if we can hear you first?
Oh. Thanks, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, so we can hear you, so you can ask the question.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Passman, for your submission. I wondered if you had a view about the redistribution of rates that's occurring from commercial to residential. So there's about $10 million worth of rates that will be transferred from the commercial to the residential sector as a result of the revaluation, and I wondered if you had a view about that.
Well, I don't know the reasoning behind the transfer. Presumably it's got to do with commercial properties not going up in value as much as residential properties. Same principle applies. Whatever you decide needs to be raised, and okay, there's an additional angle there that ratepayers would have to understand, that the commercial sector is quite different from the residential sector. I can see that. Businesses are struggling, and values have changed according to the circumstances that prevail. You put it in the same pot. You apply the flat rate to it, and we end up paying whatever it is we're paying. We're paying it now because presumably this calculation includes the transfer. I mean, the 20% I'm paying presumably includes the transfer of whatever rates burden from commercial to ratepayers that you've mentioned. You're not going to do it afterwards. You're not going to charge us 20% and then say, oh, well, we're going to transfer the burden of rates from commercial to ratepayers, and you're going to have to pay another lot on top of your 20%. That's already been done, presumably.
Yes, it's all based on valuation of land, absolutely.
Well, my argument is it isn't based on valuation of land. If it was based simply on valuation of land, then I wouldn't be having this discussion, would I? It would simply be a percentage on the new valuation. But there are other factors, and this is what my presentation has been about. It's all these other factors. Ratepayers understand that rates are based on land values. Well, they don't really. A lot of them think it's based on total rates, but it's based on your land value. If you get that into your head, you expect that whatever's going on will result in some figure based on your land value, but it isn't just based on land value. And my presentation was an attempt to show how I'd struggled to understand how you'd gone beyond the simple use of land value into other territories, like subdivision.
Okay, that concludes your time, but thank you very much for coming in and making a submission.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Your submission will be considered along with other submissions in a couple of weeks' time when councillors deliberate on the annual budget. Thank you. Now, we're now moving to the next submitters, submission 197, which is David Chappell and Annette Nixon. Welcome, both of you. If you can just check that both of your microphones are on, then over to you.
Right, good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk to the council. We come here to comment on the various works that have been carried out around the Riverstop shopping area in Awapuni. As you are aware, these grew from the installation of the cycle lanes. The local community was always supportive of these, but concerned about the effect on other aspects of the layout. The parking was modified from what was originally proposed, and my observations are that it is working reasonably well. It would not work without the support of the two churches, and as the Warden of St Matthew's, I can say that we're happy that the car park is used in this way. We are at the moment investigating replacing the house with a number of community houses, and I'm not sure how that will affect the layout of the parking, but I'm sure that there will still be parking available. One interesting aspect of this is the rates are proposed to increase by 46.7%. So we're all part of this amazing journey we're on, from 2,516 to 3,693. This is affecting our thinking about the value of the land and what we do with it. I'd like to focus on the fact that the project is not complete. One aspect I'm disappointed in is that the bus shelters that were between Patama Road and Maxwell's Line, and I counted the other day, I think there are 7 stops. I'm not sure if they are all had shelters, but none of them have been reinstated. My last conversation with the council engineer led me to believe that they were looking at a cantilevered type of shelter, as the layout had obviously changed. I suspect they proved a bit difficult, as they were not part of the original thinking, and so have not happened. I believe they should be put back, and if people are to be encouraged to wait for a bus, some shelter seems desirable, even if not necessary. If they are not to be put back, I think there should be some statement as to why. The bollards in the middle of the road were installed to try and slow traffic. I think there was something like about 20 more put in. There are 2 left. Is that it? Will the bases of the ones that have been hit be removed? Will others be installed? If not, will there be something else to try and slow the traffic as it goes through the area? The planted areas on the corners of Patama Road are disappointingly untidy, and if it were not for a local resident who weeds them from time to time, they would be worse. I'm also one of those who feel that the signs denoting Awapuni should be redone to have the words Awapuni viewed as you enter the area. I'm certain that was the intention, and I think there needs to be a conclusion to this matter. These and a number of other items I consider that leave the project unfinished. A number of things were talked about, and the community got enthusiastic, but I feel that what's been done is the bare minimum, and that is disappointing. And I trust there is some budget allowance to finish the work. At the time of parking changes, there was excellent dialogue between the council officers and the community. I see the need for some more of that to see the work finished. Even if that only identifies what will be done with some sort of timeline, that would be better than just leaving as it is, incomplete. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Following on from David's comments about proposed development at St Matthew's Church and the Awapuni village in general, there are a number of things that I want to comment on. Now, later this morning, Janine from Boho Cafe was to make a submission, but she's unable to be here because she's short-staffed. So one of the things that she brought to our attention was the lack of signage between Awapuni village and Manawatu River, and the feeling that having created an identity for River Stop in the village, that there was a great deal more that could be done. And part of that would be signage indicating how people could make their way to the river, the access points there. Also, when a car crashed through the fish and chip shop, we lost a very nice seat that was out in front, and that hasn't been replaced. So there are a number of items that are kind of an ongoing concern to the people in Awapuni, and we really would appreciate the opportunity to be able to continue those discussions. You've got our submission in front of you, and I'm not commenting on all of the things, but I do want to comment on the Local History Week and the great support that we had from Awapuni Community Library in order to, for the second year, to be able to run a local history event in Awapuni, and that was hosted at Boho Cafe. And this second year there was also funding available through council. So those kinds of things enable initiatives, creative activities to flourish. So we do appreciate those, as we appreciate the support and the work of the librarians, and also of Amy, who's over here, in the liaison that she carries out at our meetings and also at the Awapuni Community Centre. Those channels of communication really do help when people are interested and active and want to see things happening in their communities. On page 3, there were matters that had been brought to our attention where we were asked to be advocates. Now, all 3, I know, are perennial issues. For example, one was the right turning arrow at the signal phases at College Street, Botanical Road. Now, I know that this has come up over the years, but it's still a matter of concern because we frequently see vehicles travelling off along Ferguson Street and through narrow dogleg streets like Kingston Street in order to avoid making a right-hand turn at that intersection. We'd also been asked to advocate for funding support for Palmerston North neighbourhood support. We have a number of support networks within Awapuni and that area, and believe that they do an excellent job in connecting people and also passing information on and bringing things to local attention. The third one is the walkways between College Street and Winchester. One goes by St Matthew's Church, the other between College Street and Newbury Street, and both of these are routes to the Awapuni Park, Awapuni Community Centre. Both have dog legs, and the issue that's been raised is that when people enter them, they have no idea what's coming towards them, whether it's someone on a bicycle, whether it's someone with a dog, whatever. And I believe that in some local authorities, they have worked to find ways to eliminate that. Now, we've had a talk about it, and we can't really see how, with the geography of that those particular walkways, would be easy to do. But I'm sure there is some kind of device system. I mean, David suggested perhaps a mirror would help to make those areas safer and to encourage people to A, access the park, and B, use something for the purpose for which it was constructed. Now, I have, Narelle Ward was going to be doing the submission for Awapuni Community Centre and is unable to attend because of work commitments today. So she asked me to acknowledge the Awapuni Community Centre, and truly it's a treasure in our community, very well used. If you look at that submission, you'll see the list of groups that use it. But if you are there this coming Saturday between 3 and 4, given that it's a fine day, you will find that there will be a very well-attended tennis club. There's also the community garden. There's the blessing of that wonderful new preschool play area. And there will be the miniature makers group in the hall, and there will be also crop swap, which is a wonderful community activity, which is growing in interest and support. We've had up to 30 people turn up in that hour for crop swap. So we're doing well. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. There is a few questions, if that's okay. Firstly, from the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Annette, and David, great to see you again, and thanks for all the work you do in Awapuni as well. It's really appreciated. It's a fantastic suburb. A lot of these things that you've brought up are what I'd call level of service or infrastructure related. The graffiti, which I hate, on the walkways, is still there? Okay. I just want to note the officers present that can we get that sorted? To me, that's a very easy one. Along with the signage, and I too, and a few other councillors had written in about the signage. Has that been altered? Because I understand Awapuni was back to front and it was going to be altered.
No, it isn't.
Okay, again, if I could just go to the officers, I understand that was getting fixed. And I'm sure Councillor Hancock can sort out neighbourhood support. But anyway, thank you again.
And Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a little bit to follow up from the Mayor around the unfortunate Inupawa signage that is meant to be Awapuni. We do have assurance the improvement, that the correction is in the pipeline. Have you received any communication about that? Okay.
No, I haven't heard anything about it at all.
Okay.
No.
No,
That, I guess, is one of the unfortunate parts of this, why we're here, is that there does seem to have recently been a lack of communication. Yeah.
Thank you for that. My other question's really, I suppose, reflecting on the very long list of, in some cases, quite small things that, in my perception, quite small things that are needing attention. And as I expect you're both reasonably well aware, quite a bit of our planning and budgeting kind of happens either on a function basis or an asset class basis. So we have a line for budget for bus shelters and another line for footpaths and another line for placemaking, et cetera. Would a more place-based, i.e. like villages, planning approach, in your view, actually correct at a systems level some of the challenges that you're facing in Awapuni? And if we were to do that, would it be relevant beyond just Awapuni Village, and should we be looking at more place-based planning across the city?
That sounds great. It's been years of advocating to get any kind of asset management carried out at Awapuni Community Centre. We're catching up now. And the place is working pretty well. But putting it in terms of a village, I think, is a lovely idea, and there is benefit in that, because it does enable people to bring the things that they have noticed to one point, and we can. We've got a number of contacts around the village who kind of collect up the things that people are griping about. I mean, one's Stephen Mercer at the garage. Now, if there's anything going on in Awapuni, he knows, because they all stand there and complain to him, and because he's a great listener, he gets to hear about it. I mean, that's only one example. I mean, through the churches is another example that people... So there are ways of doing it and bringing the information together for a place-based assessment. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Good idea.
Can I just comment about the bus shelters? Because I feel that's part of the project to put in the new bus stops that were there, the changed layout, and they were simply taken away, but they haven't been brought back. So I regard that as part of that project rather than something else. And I think it was just something that was either forgotten or got a little bit difficult.
Okay, thank you. That does conclude your time for today, but thank you very much for your submission, both of you. Okay, so we're going to move back up to the top of our list today and welcome Chris Whaiapu. That's submission number 126. Now, Chris, you have 10 minutes. You're familiar with the lights. The orange will go on after 7 minutes, and then the red at 9 minutes. Over to you. Just make sure your microphone's on. Thank you.
Atamari e tēnā rā koutou, katoa ngā kaunihera o tō tātou nei rohe, ngā mihi o te ata. Just to begin with, the proposal for Rangitani River Ranges was a discussion which began in 2018. When the discussion started, it was a little bit too advanced, but it was, however, first raised as a discussion point once Ahimate began its development and the space started to create a lot of visitors and residences utilising that area. Subsequently, on the back of the recreation of a nice destination, there was a fatality that Christmas, and then just recently this year there was also additional drownings which occurred. Largely the River Ranges concept was first mooted as a prevention measure, because what was missing along the entire river space as we began to beautify it was a presence of somebody physical in each of those locations throughout the day, in particular the summer and hotter months when a lot more people started to visit those sites. As we started to move along the river and create more things and activities for residents and visitors to do, as well as bring the mātauranga Māori component to those sites. As people began to appreciate it, it did create a lot more foot traffic, and it did create a lot more interest from the public around those sites. But it also brought with it nuisance behaviours, and it also brought with it access points to different parts of the river, and the majority of actually all of those spots where people can access the river from, in particular on the back of the kōrero from the Awapuni whānau, are all unmonitored areas along the river. So we began to work with the council officers around what a prevention measure or what could be utilised along the river space to assist with the ongoing manaaki and the ongoing kaitiaki of the river. What is being considered, or what was proposed, was the river ranges would best be suited to fit within the Te Motua Poutua management plan. So for consideration, rather than beginning and starting a new line now, the river ranges is being considered to go to the LTP for 2024 to be then put into the Te Motua Poutua management plan so that it can form part of a larger management of Te Motua Poutua and the river park and the river framework moving forward as a part of its ongoing management. Everything that is happening in the space right now is all currently under development, but it's about getting in front of the management of that when we get to that point. So this is a solution, I guess, that will assist with the management of the river park, as well as the Te Motua Poutua management plan and wider plan going forward. River ranges. The ranges itself isn't a new concept, and taking the information, I was able to pull information from both DOC as well as the wider Greater Wellington Council, who also have a couple of ranges themselves. The ranges can do anything or all of, some or all of the following. They can keep the park or reserve or campsite amenities clean and remove rubbish. They can build and maintain links with local community and iwi. They can assist and give information to visitors of parks or reserves. They can develop and oversee volunteer and education programs, support and monitor concession holders and property license holders such as graziers or people who want to camp, monitor, manage and protect native wildlife, habitats and plants, control and monitor pests and weeds, and run native plant nurseries, patrol marine reserves and enforce compliance bylaws, make or maintain tracks, toilets, huts, signs, fences, protect and restore historical sites. The idea of the Rangitani River Ranges is considered the same, but from a kaitiakitanga or a stewardship perspective, which could also look to include acting as kaitiaki along the river space, as a kaitiaki awa. They could become river guides, historical guides, education guides, be trained in first aid, be a first emergency responder, be trained in fire and evac procedures, and at certain times of the year, depending on how the redeployment of this role might happen, or roles, also act as sort of lifeguards, prevention and security as well, and safety and security. Just drawing from the budget of what the Greater Wellington Council have provided, a ranger or a junior ranger usually begins as a start line of 42 to 50, and a senior would go anywhere from 65 to 90. We've socialised this idea of the Rangitani River Ranges with a number of other agencies, the Manawatu River Leaders Accord, the Green Corridors, Manawatu Striders, Horizons Regional, Manawatu District, Tatarua District, Department of Conservation, FENS, Water Safety New Zealand, internally Rangitani, and other community groups, example, Ahimate Reserve Community. There are some alternative solutions, however, so I don't want to just propose this purely for. Other alternative solutions which we have discussed is an ambassador program, very, very similar to what's been happening here within the city with the City Ambassador program. There could be a voluntary life-saving service which could also be explored. There could also be lifeguards positioned or deployed from the Lido at certain times of the year to different Manawatu swimming hotspots during the warmer months. And there could also be voluntary working groups formed to monitor certain aspects of the river as well. However, these would be largely volunteer groups, and it would be largely at the risk of those people being available to be able to do that. However, the Rangers proposal seems like a bona fide line to be able to put this in place now as a part of the wider management of the entire river park from 24 onwards. I think that's all I have for you. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you, Chris. We do have a couple of questions. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kia ora, Chris. Chris, you're River Ranger, so thinking about the summer months and that, you're talking down the river, it could be 7 days, and sort of like the time frames, are you talking sort of 9 in the morning through till late at night? I'm trying to get a picture of it. It won't be just one ranger, will it?
No, the concept would be for two rangers. One would monitor or patrol the eastern bank of the Manawatu, starting at the Marae Tarata site, which is still being created, or Ahimate, which is the next destination above that, all the way out to Te Apiti. And then there would also be a ranger on the western side, which would be from Te Motu o Poutua, also making its way all the way out along the Hiarakotahi track to Linton, all unmonitored tracks.
And you would have to allow for, as I say, 7, so it wouldn't be, you'd end up with sort of about 4 or 5 trained people over a period of time.
Over a period of time, yes.
Have you thought of being able to use volunteers for that role as well, like we do with Wild Base?
We haven't fully explored everything. I wouldn't call it a test group. The people who we've spoken to so far are largely active within one particular area, for example, Ahimate. So they kind of stay within that area and then they just monitor that area. There are spots, there are more than one entrance point into the river. There is one, for example, down the end of Albert Street. That's an unmonitored entry point into the river, and also on the other side of the river where there's Penfold Reserve, where a scientist from, I think it was one of the research facilities on the other side, unfortunately lost his life. Again, an unmonitored access point into the river.
Thank you.
So to come back on that, we haven't explored what a voluntary group might look like to be able to take this on just yet. Yeah.
Thank you.
And we have a further question from Councillor Johnson online.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Tēnā koe, Chris. Are you thinking that the River Rangers would be employed by Palmerston North City Council, or would they be employees of, say, iwi, or are you thinking that we would create 2 positions, or is it more that we would help fund 2 positions for iwi to manage? I'm just not clear on which.
That's a Morena, that's a good question. we haven't kind of landed fully just yet as to where or who would be looking after that. We just know that the timing is right now to get in front of creating the line and to do the work to be able to be put into the Tumutua Poutoa management plan. We haven't also worked on the arrangement of the Tumutua Poutoa management plan either. So once we get through those discussions, we'll be able to have a clearer picture as to where this would sit and fit within that plan itself.
Okay, so you're not asking us to put in a budget line for this next annual budget. You're asking for it to be considered in the management plan for Tumutua Poutoa.
Correct, which would be from 24 onwards.
Okay, thank you.
There's also a question from Councillor Hancock.
It's for Councillor Butt. I was just signaling.
Thank you, Madam
Councillor
Chair,
Butt.
and kia ora, Chris. I like your submission, and the idea behind Ranger is obviously to facilitate the community and to help the community and to welcome them. But if you ask me, the title Ranger looks like an authority which will be controlling things. If you ask most of the immigrant communities, especially the Asian, if you ask some of them that come to the river park, there is a ranger there, they will say, oh, we don't want to be beaten by them. So how flexible are you to rethink about this title, the ranger?
Absolutely flexible. Absolutely flexible. To be honest, the name really just had a nice sound to it. had quite a catchy appeal. Rangitane River Rangers.
Thank you.
The Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I was in the queue. Somehow it must have dropped out. Thank you. Kia ora, Chris. Thanks for socialising this. I mean, I respect my colleague over there, but I actually do like the name, actually, Rangitane River Rangers. It's got a catchy name to it. Are you aware Water Safety New Zealand actually came and submitted to us? And it was more on the physical water side of things. But they would possibly be a partner with you going forward?
Absolutely, because we don't have the capacity at the moment to be able to provide for the monitoring of certain areas of the river at certain times of the year. We would welcome the inclusion of Water Safe New Zealand.
Yeah, and this is the way you've explained things, the way I've read your submission. It's a bit of a hybrid though, isn't it? It's about visitor activity, telling stories, tourism, as well as the respect of the water and the awa. Is that right?
Correct, which is the reason why we had socialised it also with the wider collective of groupings who are all working together on enhancing and restoring the mauri of the Manawatu.
Yeah, and just one final question, Madam Chair. Regional Council, you spoke about Greater Wellington and the example of what's happening down in the capital, and that's a regional council, and I'm unsure what Wellington City or where they're involved. But have you submitted to our regional council or socialised it?
No, I haven't submitted to our regional council as I was looking for a place for this to be able to be included within the long-term plan.
Right.
Yeah, for the investigative work to be able to be at least conducted.
Could I suggest that they are a partner and a financial partner as well, because you know, I suppose environmentally the river, the Awa, is actually under their jurisdiction, but obviously we're your mana whenua, you probably relate to us more than a regional thing, but I do think that they should be a partner in this. But great idea.
Perfect.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you.
And just one more question from Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and tēnā koe, Chris. Good to see you here. Thank you for bringing this to us. a little bit amplifying some of what the Mayor was asking about around Water Safety New Zealand. So they have come to us with not only information about the activities they're undertaking, but an ask to help financially support an audit or assessment in this sort of winter period that could actually give rise to some potential signage or other interventions by way of river safety as early as this summer, if we really were able to progress that. Were you aware that they were making that specific ask to us?
Yeah, absolutely. I supported them with that to be able to at least get something started and activated within the city.
Excellent. So that was my follow-up, was to understand your view on it. So you are supportive of
Absolutely
seeing that
supportive.
funded in
Yes.
this time frame and feeding that into eventually the River Rangers concept.
Exactly. They also know within themselves their own limitations around capacity to be able to monitor lots of different sites within the entire catchment of the Horizons region. So they are within themselves also struggling to be able to keep on top of that. But that piece of work, what they're looking to do for us, is specifically for the Manawatu within the Palmerston North City District area.
Great, kapa. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chris. That concludes the questions, and your submission will be considered in 2 weeks' time when councillors decide on the annual budget.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you. Kia ora. So now we're moving to the next submitter, submission number 326, David Meri from the Environment Network Manawatu. Welcome, David. Sorry, Daniel. Sorry about that.
Cool. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you, Kayla and Karen. So my name is Daniel Morimoya, but everyone knows me as Mori. So I'm here to speak on behalf of Environment Network Manawatu, and in particular the Manawatu Food Action Network, which I am the coordinator of. So a bit of background, we're an umbrella organisation that have underneath us many community groups involved in the area of environmental improvement, and the Manawatu Food Action Network in particular, we have groups that work in the area of food rescue, food support packages, community gardens, and so on. So as an example, Just Silch is an organisation underneath us, as well as the Pascal Street Community Group, Growing Gardens and Communities, and many other organisations like that. So I'm here to ask you to include a budget line for creating a citywide food resilience policy. Now that's a really small sentence there, but it's actually a really big kaupapa, and something that I am hopefully going to give you a number of reasons why I think you should consider and try implementing this in this year's current budget. Firstly, food security is a very real and current problem within our city. Now that could be a surprise to some people, but a colleague of mine, Dave Mollard, has recently helped write the 4412 situational analysis and Kai resilience strategy that has shown that there's a really strong need for a policy to be developed to relieve the current food insecurity in the city. And some of you who might be on environmental committee, he'll be presenting that policy next Wednesday, I think. So I suppose just a bit of terminology here. Food insecurity means people are living without reliable access to sufficient quantities of affordable, nutritious food. Resilience is the ability to prepare for, withstand, and recover from a crisis or disruption. So a resilient food system is able to withstand and recover from disruptions in a way that ensures a sufficient supply of acceptable and accessible food for all. And that kind of brings me to my second point, and this is a really big one, is that access to food is a basic and fundamental human right. And we as a society should do all we can to uphold and support this right, in particular, because it's those who are the most vulnerable that often suffer from food insecurity. The recent global pandemic has shown us all that we cannot rely solely on the current models we have. The supermarket food distribution systems were disrupted in New Zealand and across many parts of the world, and I think that's a really pertinent and topical reminder to us all that we can do better in this area. all of us, and I think the council has a really important part to play in that. And that brings me to my third point here. The council are kaitiaki of much arable land within our rohi, within our region, and can have a really large effect on what can as well as what will be done with that land through regulations, funding and support. Other councils have already made the steps, so I'm going to preempt what might be some questions here of why the council should step in and other examples, so I'm just going to briefly go over some of them. Christchurch City Council has a food resilience policy that they've had since 2014, that's over 7 years ago. Their vision is for Christchurch to be the best edible garden city in the world. The objective is a food resilient Christchurch with thriving social, economic and physical environments, providing healthy, affordable and locally grown food for all people. Auckland Council has a robust climate action plan with a section on food resilience. Their goal, a low carbon, resilient local food system that provides all Aucklanders with access to fresh and healthy food. Thirdly, Wellington City Council last year signed up to the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, joining a global movement for sustainable food systems, and I think there's been over 220 cities worldwide who have signed up to that. And that recognises food systems as a priority, bringing a wide range of social and economic benefits to the city. They're also integrating sustainable food options and opportunities into the many initiatives and projects they're working on, and that was, sorry, a bit of a quote there, that was from the past Mayor Andy Foster, I believe. And I suppose it leads me to my fourth and final point, is that this is an area of almost universal appeal. I'm only submitting to you here, and I only heard Chris's submission before, but I gather this has been a bit of a topic that may have been brought up in the past before me. So I think it is a really topical area that we should be all leaning towards. I suppose what might not be obvious, despite me saying it is a common appeal, is that as well as health benefits to people, like growing your own local food obviously has personal health benefits, but it also leads to more connected communities, which is a really important thing and something that I know the council has a priority. And it's also good for the environment, which is also a priority, and there are also climate change implications here. One of the areas I'm not sure if you're aware of is an area called shade poverty. There's been many areas of research worldwide that show that areas where there's low socioeconomic areas often have less access to shade and large trees than those who are more affluent. And some of our member groups are doing work right now that is alleviating some of that poverty. And as I say, there's also many examples of organisations whose purpose aligns within food resilience are sustainable within themselves. They create jobs, they create employment, and they provide benefit to the community. So in summary, I'd like you all to just take the opportunity to support this call for creating a city food-wide resilience policy, and thank you very much, and I'm opening myself to answering any questions now.
Thank you, Daniel. We do have a question from Councillor Hapata.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Daniel. I'm just wondering, are you actually asking for any money or just wanting to us to create a policy?
That's a really good question. What I'm asking you to is create a policy so that will inform and I suspect guide future budgets.
Thank you.
This is a pretty high level kind of ask I'm asking for here.
Councillors, are there any other questions? Oh, we have one from Councillor Johnson online.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Murray, for your submission. I wondered if you thought that the experience of crisis, I suppose, that the community has gone through with the COVID pandemic over the last couple of years, has that made the situation worse for those struggling with food resilience? Or is that something that has maybe brought this to a head for you in producing the submission? Or something, or are there lessons from that we could learn?
Yeah, good question. So my personal view and what I've heard from others is that COVID has made things worse, much worse for those living in poverty. It's increased the food insecurity for them. But at the same time, it's also, I think, brought to the forefront a lot of the organisations that work in this area to alleviate some of that food insecurity, and some of the organisations that do work about, for example, the ones that install community help with community gardens and install gardens in people's individuals' homes. So I think that COVID has definitely made things worse. So that's a big negative, obviously, but I think also has brought to the forefront of many of us, not just the people who are exposed to food insecurity, the importance of this.
Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Maura, for bringing this forward. Just wondered if you could give us a little bit of sense of your thinking at this stage around scope of what that sort of policy might cover. So a lot of the examples that I've heard you speak to are kind of public land, community level food production. Would that scope also extend to, well, where would you like to see the scope extend to?
Personally, and I mean this is what you will be deciding as a council, I think the scope's pretty huge, to be honest. I think there's a lot of areas where this affects both from climate change through to arable land use. I haven't mentioned it in my submission today, but I know one of the big issues around our country is arable and fertile land being developed for housing. I know there's other submitters who have possibly spoken on that here, but I think that's something where if that continues, fertile land being developed for houses, I think we're going to be setting ourselves up for problems in the future, because once you put houses on, you're not going to come back from that. So I think the scope could be quite large. And even though, as I kind of said at the beginning, even though it was quite a small initial line, include a budget line for creating a citywide food resilience policy, I think that could potentially incorporate underneath it quite a large range of council activities.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
And one final question from Councillor Handcock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Maura. Look, just to try and sort of crystallise, I guess, our thinking around this is the purpose of the policy really to improve the strategic framework and coordination across disparate social services. Is that really sort of the nub of the problem that we have?
That's one potential, I suppose, resultant of it, but I suppose I'd see it as bigger than that. I suppose to kind of perhaps crystallise a bit more what I'm asking for, I suppose I'd imagine within this current budget, having someone put together a policy. I've given some examples of other cities and what they've got there, and I think reading through, I think maybe there was one actual budget line within this year's proposed budget which allocated a little bit of food to for some kind of like community groups, which was pretty small in the scheme of things. And I suppose what I'd like to see, although I suspect for this year it's too big to kind of put a whole lot of things under it, I'd like to see a really robust policy made around food resilience. So going forward, the council can have a number of different initiatives and projects that would then come under that.
Great, thank you. And perhaps Councillor Johnson and the Community Development Committee might be interested in some follow-up. Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel. That concludes our questions, and so your submission will be considered along with others in a couple of weeks' time by councillors.
Thank you.
Now, we have our two final submitters for today are yet to arrive, so we're going to adjourn for a coffee break, and those of you are welcome to join us out in the Links Bend for a coffee, and we'll return here at 10:30. Submission number 340. Malcolm, you're familiar with the process, but we do have 10 minutes. The traffic light system here the orange light will go on after 7 minutes, and then the red at 9 minutes, and we'd encourage you to allow some time for questions as well. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, councillors. The opportunity, another year has gone by, to come and speak again. My submission was basically around the rates, which, reading yesterday's newspaper, there's obviously been a lot of comment regarding the rate increases or proposed rate increases. I compared my mother's rates to the neighbours, and as again, which has already been talked about, the neighbours have done quite a significant amount of improvements to their home, and their land area was exactly the same size as my mother's land area, and they paid the same amount of rates. What my point in my submission, with the increase in the valuations, which happens every 3 years, the council is obviously gaining by that percentage of increase. And I think in all reality, when they revalue things, I struggle to understand how they actually come to the conclusion they do, that, for example, if your land value goes up by 12%, why is that? And I think this is an area that the council actually really needs to look hard at, because it's just a figure that someone in an office comes up with. But it impacts people's lives in a big way. As mentioned, as I say, by submitters reported in the paper. So I'm asking the council to actually look really hard at doing a zero rate increase, because they actually are already gaining by 12% with the revaluations for this year on all of the properties. One of the submitters reported in the papers said that for councils it's hard to have areas of income. And for myself, I think for councils it's actually one area that they can improve their outcomes is by looking at their resources. And this comes back to what was mentioned in the plan about sustainability for the city and lowering things like your carbon emissions and those sort of areas. As an example of a resource, if you took a tree that, as an example in the Esplanade, when they redirected the road coming out onto Park Road, those trees were removed. And what I've noted, most trees in Palmerston North, when they're problematic or they have to be removed for redevelopment, are merely chopped into firewood. But those trees are actually valuable resources as far as timber goes. And so if you have a 90-year-old oak tree, for example, and that could be sold for timber for joinery purposes, because every month now, currently, I receive my statement from carters and there's always an increase on the price of timber. And most probably over the last year, just a round figure, it's most probably gone up 100% in its value. So we're throwing away a valuable resource. You see pictures reported in the paper about recycling products going to landfill. And yes, there is contamination issues, and that really comes down to educating the public more. But again, we're tipping away resources. I think we need to change our mindset on some of the assets that the city has and look at ways of a more sustainable future and reusing those assets in a different fashion rather than just going to landfill or being chopped up for firewood. Another area that the council could look at reducing its costs is again the way that we, should we say, outsource projects that need to be done in the city. And there was, again, reported in the paper a comment about the cost of consultants and design companies that the council is outsourcing these areas to other countries even, like Australia. Now, we had a good example with our Palmerston North Hospital of what happens when you outsource a design to a foreign country. They don't know about Palmerston North's weather. It's westerly wind, easterly wind. So the designer main entrance to the hospital facing into one of those prevailing weather systems. That again brought extra cost on the hospital, who then had to have it altered to match the weather system. So I think Palmerston North should start looking at the wonderful people we have right here to design our city and our sustainable areas. Now, we used to have a company that, for example, a local company that designed the Main Street section between Princess Street and the Square. That particular company also designed some of the entrance works to our city. So there's some really good people here that are missing out. Now, these people also have a value-added interest in their own city, so they want to see good outcomes. They are accountable because they're right here, so that again is a good outcome. I think the city also wastes, and you've wasted a lot of time debating silly issues like planter boxes down Pioneer Highway. Now, these issues could have actually been all avoided because I think when you look at the statistics, for example, around about bike lanes and accidents concerning cyclists, most of them occur at intersections. We unfortunately had a death at Ruahine Street and Featherston Street some years ago, and that intersection has never changed since then. And so, as I drew to your attention last year, there's at that intersection one dedicated cycle traffic light system. Now imagine if there were these dedicated traffic light systems at all of our intersections. Surely this would make cyclists feel a lot safer, because this is where they're actually vulnerable the most. Also at roundabouts, I would like to see dedicated cycle lanes going around the inside of the roundabout. This was another example of Fitzherbert Avenue and Baiatua Street. I think that was where they have a dedicated left-hand cycle lane to come on to Fitzherbert Avenue. But again, this is the kind of innovation that can save, in the long term, a lot of costs and expense. Another area which the city could, I question where the city has actually spent the money, is the roading budget. Our roads around the city are not in a very good condition, and there's potholes appear all over the place, and they just get patched up and then they reappear. So it's a continual repair rather than addressing the issue once with that hole and fixing the issue. So that would save the city a lot of money, because obviously the company that comes along and fills in the pothole, they're not concerned if that's all they're asked to do, so they're not concerned if the pothole reappears 2 weeks later, because they make, again, money by going and filling it up again. But that costs the ratepayers. So these are areas that overall, if we resourced sources locally, involved people locally, then the city would reduce its costs. I thought back to when I was a child, and when I got $10 in my pocket, I thought, man, I was rich. And when I started earning, I got $100 in my pocket, and I thought, man, I'm getting close to being a millionaire. And then as your wage slowly goes up, you think, oh, I'm earning more money, I'm going to be rich. But then when you look back, most people, they say, earn $1 million at least in their lifetime. But you look back and you think, where's that $1 million gone to? And rates is a bit like a monster. You keep feeding it and feeding it and feeding it, and it grows bigger and bigger and bigger. But I think the monster's got to slim down a bit now, and you can't just keep feeding it all the time. And so I think we've got to look at it really seriously, because this is our sustainability, this is our future that we're talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malcolm. Councillors, are there any questions? No.
No questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Malcolm. Appreciate you
That's
coming
all
and
right.
making your submission, and that will be considered by councillors in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome Mike Clement. Now, this is submission number 90. Councillors, this submission is included in your pack for session 5 for the 3:30 session this afternoon, if you're looking for it. But welcome, Mike. Over to you.
Thank you for having me here today. Long-time griper, first-time attendee. I wish more people would actually turn up and partake in democracy. I won't say you work for me, because you don't. You work for the city. And this city is, at the moment, under severe financial stress, as is the entire country. We've gone through 2 years of COVID, which has affected everyone, emotionally, physically, mentally, and financially. It's affected our country and the number of people who can come and work here. It's affected businesses who have collapsed due to economic strife by actions of both local and central government. It is your job as councillors to hold your officials to account. It's your job to make sure that the budget is balanced. As an individual, I don't spend more than I earn. I've got a responsibility to my family to make sure that I have enough money coming in to pay for my bills. When I go to work, I make sure that I stick to my budget, and I make sure that my company has enough money to do what it's meant to do, and that we don't go over budget. As a council, you have that same obligation to the ratepayers. You have a budget. You have a certain amount of income, and you must stick to it. We read all the time, and as Malcolm made a submission before, we read all the time about how projects local and central governments do go over budget all the time. I read about a project that hasn't even started in Cuba Street, where we're planning to expand the footpaths and widen the footpaths. No stone has been turned, no turf has been dug, and it's already over budget. I read about the project to redevelop the council building and the library, which has been outsourced to Australia, which is over budget, and none of you have actually seen anything. Am I correct? How on earth is that acceptable? When we talk about financial responsibility, about responsibility to the ratepayers, and when you talk about proposing a 20 to 30, even a 40% rate increase for some people, how on earth are we as ratepayers meant to accept that? Where is the fiscal responsibility? You cannot turn to ratepayers who are already struggling and say, pay us more money, we can't account for the rest of it, and we aren't looking after what you're giving us already, but give us more and trust us that we'll do a better job in the future. It's not acceptable. I'd get fired if I did that at work. I'd have my house repossessed if I did that to the bank. You as a council, your only accountability comes once every few years when it's election time. That doesn't wash anymore. You have to think about the local people, you have to think about the people you see in the street, and you have to be able to reconcile with your conscience. Would you accept that of an employee? If the answer is no, then you shouldn't accept it. My proposal is, because I understand rates have to go up, but rates have to go up at a measured level. If you own a rental property, you're restricted at how much you can increase your rents each year. I'm not fortunate enough to own a rental property. I barely manage my house. As a council, your rates increases should be restricted to a certain level as well. Whether that's capped at the OCR or the cost of living increase or inflation, that's a matter for subject and debate. But it is something that needs to be concreted in so that these excessive increases never occur again. And so that you as a council and us as the citizens and ratepayers of this community and this city actually have some faith that the money that we give to you is spent wisely and efficiently, and that there is accountability for the people that you give it to who do the jobs for us. That's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for your wise words. Have you thought about any projects that we could take out of the current budget at the moment?
I think Cuba Street should stop at the moment. There's no need for that. Well, it's a nice to have, it's not a must have. Council needs to look at the projects that are currently, and let's be honest, the redevelopment of the library and the council building that you haven't actually seen anything of. I wouldn't pay them another cent. I would demand to see what they've done. I demand that they present it to you and you can actually debate what they've done. Why give good money after bad? If they haven't done a damn thing and you don't know about it, why give them more money? See what they've got, see if it's what you actually want, see if it's what the ratepayers actually want, and then go from there. If there's something really good there, then actually set something concrete in stone and say, we'll give you this much more. But we want concrete, firm deadlines to be upheld, and if they don't meet it, penalise them. We did it with Transmission Gully, and I think that's one of the best projects that we've done in a long time. It was overrun, but there have been penalties on the actual company who didn't meet their deadlines. And that should be the same with all government projects. If they don't meet the budget, if they don't meet the deadline, that's on them.
Thank you.
Question from the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, thanks, Mike, and along the same lines as Councillor Harpiter, were there any projects? But reading your submission, you've obviously been faced with quite a hefty increase at home, is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. And what about, I mean, you can choose to answer this or not, but business-wise, are you facing the same sort of pressures business-wise?
So I work for a not-for-profit organisation at the moment. So I work with IDS Services, which provides residential support for people with intellectual disabilities.
Yes, heard of them, yeah.
Obviously, we don't get paid very well in the not-for-profit sector. In fact, I ended up with IDEA in 2020 during COVID. I suffered a redundancy due to COVID and a roughly 50% pay cut. So that hit at a very bad time. I wasn't the only one. And this isn't just about me. I'm speaking for the people who either are too afraid to turn up because they think you won't listen, or the people who have just... And unfortunately, we're an apathetic society nowadays. We don't speak up as much as we used to. I remember my father going to local board meetings up in Auckland when they used to have the local wards, and he would speak up whenever that had attended. We don't do that anymore, whether that's a generational thing, whether that's we've just become so accustomed to being the doormats of society and government. I don't know, but I think, as I said at the beginning, we need to speak up more and we need to be heard, because when we aren't heard, nothing changes.
Look, just thank you for your submission and the way you've addressed us. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Mike, for coming in and speaking up. Did want to query around kind of the closing part of your submission and relate that to your written submission in terms of where you'd like to see the pegging. In your written submission, you do refer to the official cash rate, and just wondered what your view is around that being. Why is that where it should be set as opposed to other options?
As I mentioned, I used OCR in my written one because it is a measure that is set centrally and it is a set measure that everyone can apply. But as I mentioned, there's other ones that can be done, which is the cost of living increase or inflation. Having a standard which is not arbitrary, which is set by someone other than the council, means that there's no ability for people to move it as they see fit. If it's set by a local, by a central agency, someone we trust like the Reserve Bank, then they know what's happening with the money as much as anyone knows what's happening with the money. And that way there is some consistency about the fact that they are meant to be apolitical, that they are meant to be the people who understand more about the long-term financial implications of what's happening. They know more than I do. I'm not a money man.
Thanks for clear. So to be clear then, you're not saying that the OCR should be
No, I'm saying
preference.
There should be, as I mentioned, there's several that I mentioned which need to be debated, the merits and cons of each, to determine which is the best measure and which is the most consistent and fair for ratepayers.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mike. That concludes the questions. So thank you very much for coming and making a submission.
It's my pleasure.
That concludes our submissions for today, councillors. We will be finishing now and coming back at 3:30 this afternoon. Thank you.